Today, I want to talk about how API management, as we know it today, is broken. I'm Josh Twist, co founder and CEO of Zuplo. In my past, I've been a vendor and a customer of API management products. When I worked at Microsoft, I founded a number of services: Azure Logic Apps, Power Automate Pro, mobile services, and most notably Azure API Management, which we created through an acquisition of a company called Epiphany. After that, I was head of product at Facebook, where I led Facebook Analytics and New Experiences organization. And then I was head of product at Stripe, where I led the payment methods teams and looked after many APIs. So I have a lot of experience working on APIs, on developer tools, and in particular, have quite a lot of opinions around API management, API gateways. What I'm going to present to you today is feelings I've had about this space and how they're not serving the actual needs of delivering better APIs fundamentally. Now, obviously, as a founder of a company that is established to come in and fix this, that is very much the hypothesis behind the company I've built. And so today we'll take a look and discuss some of those points. And I'll talk about how we've tried to solve some of them in Zuplo. So why do we have API management? What is the ultimate goal of API management? Well, I think it's to ship better APIs. Now, that's a very broad set of terms. What does that mean? But really, that is the goal. Shipping better APIs serves some higher level goals like increasing monetization, reducing support costs. So it's really in service of the business. But ultimately, we're trying to ship better APIs. And what does better mean? Well, I think it means things like secure and compliant and consistent and have a great developer experience and they're discoverable and observable. But how do APIs really get better? Well, I think there's two angles that we look at this. One is governance, which is ensuring that the APIs that we ship meet a certain threshold of quality that we have defined as an organization. So that might be the security posture is correct, the rate limiting is in place, etc. So that's governance. But in reality, the way software, including APIs, any kind of software, gets better is having an optimized development process with a tight feedback loop. Now, I've been very lucky. I've worked at some of the best engineering organizations in the world. Most notably, Facebook, I think, is the most impressive. And one of the key ways they achieve their extreme throughput, high velocity, and improving the products that they build so quickly is by having a tight feedback loop. We all know this instinctively as developers, that a tight feedback loop matters in every respect, from shipping a product and getting feedback from customers at the macro scale, to even just being able to run your tests and debug your code in a very tight way. So you're getting feedback, you're getting input as tight as possible. And that's critical to building and shipping better APIs. Now, when we look at API management today, we see lots of focus on governance. I still think there's lots of work that can be done over there, but very little on optimizing the development process and empowering your engineers. And so that, I think, is one of the most fundamental problems with API management today. When we think about that optimized feedback loop, that optimized development, we know we need a fast feedback loop, as we just said. Collaboration is another key aspect. The best tools in the world today help developers collaborate. One of my favorite examples actually is Vercel. If you haven't seen Vercel, you should check it out. It is a hosting platform that helps you stand up marketing websites very quickly and share previews with colleagues. Now, they have this very fast build process. So for me, making a change to the build being deployed and visible to my colleagues is a matter of seconds. That is the kind of speed that removes friction from the life of an engineer, keeps them engaged, keeps them happy, gets them productive, gets feedback flowing faster through the system, and increases open and free collaboration as you build out your product. Also, having tools that are easy to learn is critical. It should feel intuitive. It should feel fast to learn. You shouldn't have to go on a week-long training course to learn this product, as many of the vendors offer today when you start your sales process with them. API management, as it sits today, really gets in the way of that. It sits on an iron throne, defended by a team of architects or knights of the round table who guard access to it. Developers can't easily work with it, and therefore that's going to break down collaboration. They're very hard to learn. As I've mentioned, many of the solutions today force us to go on a week-long training course to learn how to use this. And critically, it doesn't fit the workflow of a developer. Everything's a little bit alien. The configuration isn't in text files like everything else is for my code, right? Imagine if you had to check lines of code into a database or make API calls to Terraform to write code. It all just feels very strange. It's also very slow to deploy, to set up, to configure, and expensive to buy. So much so it's prohibitive to small and medium businesses really thinking about signing up for these products as a paid customer. But it's expensive to operate as well, with operations teams being significant, having to host many of them on Kubernetes, which itself is a giant burden. And I've long thought, it's nearly 10 years since I founded the Azure API management team, and I've watched this space just kind of wowed that it hasn't advanced, and no one has looked to solve these problems. And so that's what we're trying to do with Zuplo, and want to share with you today our approach to try and tackle some of these. I share this in the context of a few things. One is, obviously you're interested in Zuplo, but if not, hopefully some of the points we make here and some of the sort of hints around one part that you might be ignoring when you think about API management and higher velocity output from your engineering team working on your APIs is to focus on this tight feedback loop. Choose and prefer solutions, even if you're going to build it in-house, where you move these things out of the way and you enable your teams to move really fast with high independence and high velocity. So the way we think we fix it at Zuplo is building what we call, and credit to Mehdi at Apidays here, shift left infrastructure. So that is, make API infrastructure that fits into the workflow of developer, shortens the feedback loop, allows developers to engage with the gateway much earlier in their life cycle. That's the shift left part of it. So it's very much part of how they approach building their solution, and not some afterthought they try and horn their API into. We've taken a very developer-centric approach. I actually want to give you a demo of that. I think the only way to see what that means is to actually see it in action. So I'm going to give you a live demo right now. We also offer a fully managed solution. So there's no hosting of Kubernetes. We do everything for you, and we seamlessly auto-scale. And that's by partly choosing the correct platform on which to run this. We choose to run on edge compute, and there's a couple of reasons for that. In particular, designing for the future. I'll talk more about that at the end of the deck. But I think for now, actually, I want to give you a very quick demonstration of Zuplo and just show you how we focused on speed and developer centricity. And as we go through that, talk about why we think it's important. So this here is Zuplo's web console. I'm going to create a new project here. I'm going to call it Apidays demo. And one of the things we really focus on is speed. So this is actually going to be a live gateway that we're going to be playing with here. Typically takes about just 20 seconds for the gateway to be live. Everything we do, we base on open standards. So the routing file, this routes.oas.json file here, stands for Open API Specification. So the routing file that we use is a good old Open API document. So if you do design first, we work great with Open API. You can import your Open API, you can keep importing it, and we will merge any changes. Or if you don't yet do design first, using Zuplo will set you on the right path because you're using Open API behind the scenes. I'm not going to import an Open API file right now. What I'm going to do is actually add a route manually. So I can do that using this button here. And what we're going to do for this demo is I'm going to proxy a demo backend. So there's a nice demo API here called JSON placeholder, and it returns a list of to-dos. It's just very simple API here that returns a list of to-dos, as you can see. So we're going to use that as our backend, and I'm going to configure my first route. I'm going to call it get all to-dos. /v1/to-dos will be the path. So I'm adding some versioning, some abstraction here. And that's going to be the backend. Actually, let's use a URL rewrite. So I paste that in. I click save. And when this spinner finishes spinning, this change will actually be live for me to test. Let's go and take a look at it. Here's the URL of my gateway, API demos main 6a6, etc. Let's click on that. And there you go. You can see it's actually proxying the to-do. So we already have a gateway up live on the internet. If this wasn't a recording, you'd be able to come and hit this with me. So what I'm going to do now is show you some of the policies that are built in and just how easy it is to set them up, and this focus on speed and getting developers engaged early. So here's our policy section. So notice we have a request pipeline, then it goes to the handler, which decides what to happen on the back end, and then the response pipeline where you can make changes to the response. I'm going to add a new policy to the request pipeline here. We have a very healthy library of policies, and I am going to choose rate limiting. Now, our rate limiter is fully distributed. It runs at the edge. It scales amazingly. We have customers doing many billions of API requests per month with us, and it's configurable in a very keen way. We are very passionate about empowering developers to use their superpower, which is writing code. So you can actually write code. You can choose the option function here and write a little bit of JavaScript that tells the API, the rate limiter, how to engage. So, for example, your premium customers might get 1 million requests a minute. Your free customers might get 1,000. For this little demo, I'm just going to do IP-based rate limiting, and I'm going to give myself 1 request per minute. I'm going to save that change, and when that finishes spinning, that will be live. So let's go and test that again. I'm going to go back here, and if I refresh this twice, then I got a 429, too many requests. The rate limiter is kicked in, deployed that quickly. This idea of tightening the feedback loop, edit, save, test, being just seconds is critical. So now we're going to add API key authentication. This is usually a lot of work for teams. You often are building your own API key auth. We've made this super easy and have a very advanced solution here. So I'm going to save that. If I go and refresh this when this finishes spinning, means the change is live. I should get a 401 unauthorized. Great, perfect. So because I don't have an API key. Now I need to go and create an API key. So I'm going to create a consumer over here. We have an API for this. I am using the UI. And the consumer, let's imagine my customer is US Bank. And the manager of this key is going to be me because I'm giving the demo. And I can associate any metadata I like with this. I'm going to put this user in some roles called basic, for example. This could be any JSON I like. Could include the customer account type, the customer account number. And I can see the key here if I wanted to, but actually, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is show you the developer portal that we generate as well. And so you get one of these with every environment you deploy for Zuplo. And this is all generated based on what we know about your API. So here you can see, for example, let me zoom in a little bit. The get all to-dos method has been automatically documented based on what we've told it, based on the Open API document that's inside Zuplo. It knows it's protected by API key, and it's telling me how to make the call. So I'm going to sign in here. And this will load up my keys. And now you can see I get a built-in API key management system. So if I need to roll this key or edit the label, I can do so. I'm going to copy this key now. But before I do, I want to show you the key. It has a special format. That is partnered with GitHub secret scanning. So if that key gets checked into GitHub, we'll get notified. And we can revoke the key, notify you, notify your customer, etc. So I'm going to copy that key and then go and make a test call. So let's go back over here. And I'm going to use our little built-in test client here. You can see I'm getting a 401 unauthorized. But if I add authorization, paste, boom, I'm now getting 200. Okay, so we just added developer documentation, API key auth, rate limiting, all in less than 10 minutes. Last thing I want to show you is the extensibility. We have built Zuplo to be very programmable. We think it's super important that developers can use their superpower and get themselves out of corners and build a gateway around the model that is their business and not have it forced into the model that some of the other built API management platforms think in terms of how you think about products and how you think about packaging things up. To do this, I'm going to build a simple roles-based access control policy. Very straightforward. I'm going to create a new inbound policy here, call it RBAC, and I just get to write code, and that's super powerful for engineers. So I'm going to define the shape of my policy options. I'm going to take a role, which is of type string. This is TypeScript I'm writing in here. And I'm then going to write the code that is inside the request policy. The request policy is a command chain pattern. If the policy returns a request, that signals to the pipeline to continue. If it returns a response, it says short circuit and send it back. So we're going to say if request.user.data. And then remember we added that metadata that was roles.includes options.role. Then the user is in the right role. We're going to return request. Otherwise, we're going to return new response. You do not have access. You can do something nicer. And by the way, you can use Visual Studio to do all this. I'm just using our web portal because it has some nice design tools. We are about to ship a full local development experience as well. So let's save that. And now I'm ready to use this policy. So I just come in here, add a custom code policy, and configure that policy in. So RBAC was the name of the module, and role. Well, what role do we want to require? Let's require admin. But if you remember, our user actually has a basic role, so they won't have access now. So let's test that. I'm just going to drag that before the rate limiter so the rate limiter doesn't get in our way as I test this. Let's go and test again. So first request, you do not have access, and that's because I'm in the wrong role. Just to show you that go full cycle and just how fast you can deploy changes, I'm going to change it to require basic role. And now I have access because I'm in the right role. So really the goal there is to show you just how fast you can iterate, customize. Super important to engage your engineering team. And then the other part of the important process that's very important, that's fast, is deploying and managing the solution. So in this case, I'm going to show you the GitHub integration. I'm going to connect this to a GitHub repo. I'm just going to create a quick GitHub repo here called Apidays demo. I'm going to pop back here. That will appear now here. So I'm going to connect to that repo. And if we take a look at this, you will see that everything that defines my gateway is now defined in code. It's just text. So the config, that open API file that we generated, here it is. It's just a good old-fashioned open API file with some extensions. All I need to do to deploy this is make a commit to Git. So if I refresh this now, actually, you'll see we have a little green check here. That shows that we deployed the production environment for you in 6 seconds. And that was deployed to the edge, 300 data centers around the world. So great for multi-cloud. If you're doing any edge compute, really the only gateway in town. But what's important here is I can also add another environment. You can have unlimited environments. All I would need to do is create a new branch and make a commit to it. And that will stand up another environment that I can use for collaboration. You might have a production stage QA development environment, but having preview environments with their own developer documentation portal, etc., that you can share with colleagues is critical to that feedback loop. People can play with the live modified version of your gateway very easily, and it just takes me seconds to set it up, tightening that feedback loop. The other thing I want to talk about that we're working on and that I think is very important in API management and shipping better APIs is what I call the council problem. So I have relevant experience here in 2 ways. One is when I was at Microsoft, I was appointed to lead a project called One API. It was actually sponsored by Bill Gates. It was why I got to meet him a couple of times, which was cool. They had 4 divisions at Microsoft: Windows, Bing, Office, and Azure. And the APIs had all been built pretty much independently. Now, that ended up in a very bad outcome where the APIs were very inconsistent. And the Office API looked nothing like the Azure API. That was bad for business because a user that had learned to use the Office API was unable to then just quickly translate and use the Azure API. So really you want consistent APIs, both from an aesthetics and competing with emerging technology. We're very good at this, but also from just cross-selling and having happy customers, which is what APIs are all about. Now, Stripe, where I led the payment methods teams, approached this in a very different way. It had a great API. It had an API council that had to review all changes to an API. Now, that led to a high-quality outcome, but unfortunately was very slow. Huge bottleneck and lengthened the feedback process. So it was a real pain for the productivity of the payment methods teams with 30-something APIs. And what we would do is we would get a change submitted. We would sit in a queue for a few days. They would be reviewed. There would be feedback, and then the process keeps ticking over, each time taking multiple days. So it seems like you're stuck between a choice of inconsistent APIs and bottlenecked review processes. We think the answer to this is automated governance, where engineering leaders define policies that are enforced when an API is trying to ship to production or to stage or QA. You get to describe that. But engineering teams can operate with complete freedom until they're getting to that point. So they can set up preview environments. They will get feedback in real time that talks about those policies and allows them to know that they're off track and the API is inconsistent with the design of the other API or isn't compliant with the rules of the organization, but doesn't get in their way of solving their particular problem in that moment. So you get the freedom of having sort of freedom with a framework for your engineering team, but your engineering leaders and architects are confident that what's making it to production meets the bar. And so this is something we're deep into working on right now. And we're actually using LLMs to do some of this automated governance and review of the Open API document and the design of the API. One thing I want to show you on this here is just very quickly is a project that we have in early alpha right now. So I'm giving you folks a sneak preview to try it. That is called ratemyopenapi.com. In here, it's absolutely free. You can come in, you can upload your Open API doc. You would just choose the file here, and that will generate a report for you that gives you feedback and a score on your overall Open API doc. So let's take a look at Asana's here. So you can see it got a very good score, 87 out of 100, and there's detailed feedback here that shows you all of the problems that we're seeing in your document. It'll actually jump in and show you the code. So this is in alpha. We haven't fully released this, but I'm going to let you folks know about it. So if you go to ratemyopenapi.com, you can actually upload your Open API document and get some real-time feedback and a score on it and see things that you can improve. We're actually going to push this much further in the near future. I mentioned that the other thing we thought about, being an experienced vendor in this market and worked on APIs a lot is how we thought about how do we design for the future of API infrastructure. And so when we started this product, we knew we had to build for edge. We knew we had to build for a new paradigm of compute where you deploy to one region, Earth, it's fully managed, and you are in 300 data centers around the world. This makes it work great with multi-cloud, means you don't have to stand up Kubernetes in multiple infrastructures multiple data centers for your infrastructure. And you can very quickly deploy to all of this. So not only is it edge capable and multi-cloud capable, which is important, but it's completely fully managed. Zuplo, we have many large customers using now, doing billions of requests per month with zero downtime to date, and offer a very high SLA. And we are undefeated in RFPs. If you try Zuplo, you choose Zuplo. It's very straightforward. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Hope you got something valuable out of it from the viewpoint of what I think is broken with API management today, how you might be able to improve some of your own processes, and remembering to focus on this idea of shifting left on your API infrastructure, empowering developers, and optimizing that development workflow as being an actually really critical part of shipping better APIs. Thanks very much.